For the early birds, we'll just wait a little bit for everybody to meander on in here. Let me know if as usual, let me know if the audio sounds all right. Do a little bit of a test run here. Just a basic kick. And yeah, let me know if... Where's the dog? Ozzy, come here. Here, buddy. They want to see you. They want to see you. Oh, come here, buddy. Is he in the frame? I can't tell. There we go. Yep. Yep, he's here. Just hanging out. As you can tell, he really is, he's just a little bit too big to be a lap dog, just like maybe just a smidge, but he really, really wants to be a lap dog when he feels like being one. But yeah, so there's the dog. How's the audio sounding compared to the music playing or the kick drum playing in the background? How is it? Ozzy's a celebrity. So, okay, let me... Okay. Let me pause this real quick. What's that, Ozzy? Who's that? He's got a thing for police sirens, too. So yeah, how's everybody doing? Everybody's strolling in here. I hope everybody is getting on pretty well with their productions and diving in. Really cool about Ableton offering a 90-day trial. I'm gonna send you all over real quick. I'm gonna post a couple links in the stream. I think everybody's here for the dog. I think that, the techno's a welcome byproduct, but I think the longer Ozzy stays in frame, the more the viewer count skyrockets. So I'm under no illusion as to who's the star of the show here. So yeah, I'm gonna post the YouTube link. This is to my profile on YouTube, obviously, and for a couple reasons. First is I wanna start, possibly, I've had a lot of people asking about if we could do YouTube streams as well, and I would like to start experimenting with that. But you need to hit some certain markings. So if you could go over to YouTube, and I never thought I would say this, but like and subscribe on my YouTube channel, then we can start also offering up YouTube streams. Also, when you go to that YouTube link, look in the About section, and there is, let me just update one more thing here. There is, for Plugin Alliance, they actually, as soon as I made that video yesterday, they are actually extending the sale that they're having, and in addition to that, they have added some more coupon codes. So I'm gonna post, what's up, Ozzy? I'm gonna post the coupon codes real quick here, if I can find them. Oz, he's just trying to be nice, but here we go. Plugin Alliance. Here we go. Found the vouchers. I'll just post these ones in the comments, but you can go to also on YouTube and it'll be up there. So those are the coupon codes for Plugin Alliance. And again, I want to reiterate, I'm not working for Plugin Alliance. I'm not getting any money from them, but they do have some pretty useful stuff, and feel free to inquire about what might be useful. There's a few things that I saw that are super useful, but the metric AB plugin is what I think that you all would be really interested in. So there's a link in the comments there. Okay, we've got a little bit of a crowd here, so I'm gonna get started. I had said, for those of you that didn't see the video where I would talk about what I'd be covering, I'm actually gonna be breaking down a track of mine that I completed and worked on years ago. Not too long ago. Well, it's probably longer than I think it was. But I thought I would pick this track. This was on, and I'm posting the link, so if you want to listen to the original one, then there it is down there on my Bandcamp. The reason I picked this track is because it's super basic. There's not a whole lot of elements. It's not a super busy track. I did 2 edits of the track. There's the original and then there's the stripped edit. And I actually pulled up the stripped edit for this session because I want you all to, especially the new producers, to understand that you can really focus in on key elements of a track, and it doesn't need a whole lot of parts as long as the parts really tell a story and work together well. Another thing before I start hitting play and breaking this track down, a lot of you have seen that in the YouTube video that I posted yesterday talking about this live stream. I want you in the comments, if you want, and we're gonna see how this works. I hope to do it by Thursday, possibly Saturday. We'll do another live stream, depending on if we can get it organized. But I want you to post tracks that you've been working on since we've been doing these tutorials. And I want you to post the track like a work in progress, and maybe find something that you're trying to improve, try to figure out something that you're having struggles with, and hopefully we can address that. So post a link, tell me exactly what the problem is that you're having or what you would like to improve on it, and follow the example. There's already been some people that have posted information, and it's pretty on form with how I'd like it to be. I want it to be a specific question, not just a general one, because I can't really answer super general questions. But yeah, do that. And then I'm gonna pick some of the examples, and then the ones that I think would be the most useful for the overall crowd, then I'll get those sessions from you, and we'll break those down, and hopefully I can help. No guarantees, but I'll try my best. Okay, so here is the track that I chose. It's a Slingshot Orbit. It's a little reference to Arthur C. Clarke's 2001. Ozzy's gonna get tangled up, and I gotta let the dog down, so. Okay, so I'll just start it from the beginning, and we'll kind of go through it once, and then I'll talk you through. And just to double check, make sure the audio is good. You can leave that in the comments. So, first thing I'm going to talk about is what I did with the only element you're really hearing right now, which is super basic. And I wrote this track when I had moved recently into, or started completing this track. That's a delay feedback, so I've got to be careful with that. I moved into a new studio, and I was not used to the room and how it sounded. So I had to kind of do a lot of trial and error. You'll see on this session, it's mixdown 6. I forget how many mixdowns I ended up doing. And I'm not even sure if this is the mixdown that we ended up using to send off to mastering. But when I'm in a room that I'm unsure of, there's a few kick drums that I always know work. And so I opted for that. This is a Native Instruments view. They have a really nice sample pack. And this is this Alkaloid kick, which you've definitely heard in so many tracks, and it's not a secret. It's pretty standard. So it's the Kick Alkaloid 2 from Native Instruments. And so the tricky thing with this was, and you hear this a lot with tracks, is when there's a bass or a sound that's hitting with the kick, making sure that that kick is still punching through the sound that's laying over the top. So here's the sound. This is actually a hardware sound that I used, and I'm gonna take off all the processing so you can see or hear what it sounds like without any processing. And I'll show you the waveform of what I'm doing here. Super basic. I think I originally, if my memory serves me correctly, this was kind of a 6-minute or 7-minute jam of this synth where I was just tweaking things very gradually. But I ended up just using, sometimes I'll use the full jam, but more often than not, I'll find the parts that are the most useful for what I'm trying to accomplish. And in this case, I just took, I wanted to have enough of a loop. I didn't want to just have it be one beat. So there's a little bit of variance in each of these sounds, and you can see it even in the waveforms a little bit. But overall, the feel is very similar. So, and actually, if you noticed, on its own, without the processing, it almost kind of sounds better on its own. Like, it sounds very full here. And when I start adding the processing, it thins it out a little bit. But that's obviously by design, because the kick still needs to punch through. And so just be aware of that if you want to have an element that's over the top of a kick drum, just make sure the kick drum's able to still be communicated in the mix. So let's put the processing back on here. And you'll see even here, here's the thing, like, I'm breaking rules here. I'm breaking my own rules. I would, if I was teaching myself, I would say, Kyle, why do you have 2 EQs in this chain? Like, why not just reduce it? But actually, this was one of those times where I just started kind of throwing stuff on top of each other. And so I want to communicate that you don't always need this super well-formed idea to start making things happen. And I was literally just seeing what kind of processing I could throw on it. And sometimes doing unconventional things will really help create a feel that if you took out your producer handbook and did everything technically perfect, you might miss out on a lot of opportunities. So in this case, I have 2 equalizers, where there would probably be some schools that would say, don't do that, you only need 1. But what I did is I wanted to use this equalizer. It rolled off the low end, so it's not interfering with the kick. But I also have it so that it serves as a low pass filter as well. And by doing this, a lot of times you don't need to add another low pass filter for the creative stuff, because you can save a lot of processor power by just using your EQ8 in Ableton as a low pass filter. And unless you're trying to add some character to it, it's not so important. You'll see and hear, let me, actually now I'm realizing that I need to make my mouse pointer grandpa size so that you can see it. Sorry for the grandpas out there watching this, but what did I do? What have I done? Okay. Let me pull this up. It's accessibility. Somebody help me out with this. Yeah, accessibility display. Such an amateur move. Okay. So you'll see here's the automation lane that we had talked about for you new producers. This allows you to gradually make or drastically make changes to all the different parameters. Like here, I've got the filter where you can hear it going, where it's very filtered down. And that's what it sounds like when it's opened up. Okay? I'll take it back to where it goes. So, and then you can see how the filter's climbing up through that. Also, what else do we have? I've got a little bit of a delay on this, and then I've got this Sound Toys decapitator, which is right here. And this plugin for processing, even just adding a little bit of character, like you can really mangle stuff with this. But for just adding your really basic character, it's super useful. So that was what I did there. And then, but when you're adding the character, it started creating some unpleasant resonances that I wanted to, you can kind of hear if you've got a good set of headphones on, it has like kind of this humming sound. And those are kind of what you would refer to as resonances that aren't really adding to the character of a track. So, like, you can hear it there. And I just wanted to notch that out, because that, if you can notch those frequencies out, that'll help clean up the mix a lot. So now that I've got that all figured out, I can go back to, I'll keep it so you can hear both of them playing with in conjunction with each other. And while you're listening to that, let's read some of the comments. Ragnar Tobias, yes, I do work with the wavetable and Ableton. I love the wavetable. The first hardware synth I ever owned was a wavetable. And actually, if you see in this audio clip, it's microwave, which is an old Waldorf synth, and that's where the sound's coming from. And that's an old wavetable synth from Waldorf, and they make also a lot of cool software stuff. So if you're wondering that. But the wavetable synth in Ableton is amazing. I highly recommend it. Thanks for that question. Marcus Rolton, how are you doing? Good to see your username. I almost said see your face, but good to see you. Ben, good to see you as well. Okay, let's get this off the solo. Now I just need to see what I've added in here. Super basic. This is just adding, Shiva, what's up? This is super basic. I just added this for some texture, and what I'll do with stuff like this is I'll just add some like delays on it, because this isn't the key element, so you can kind of you can have it be as a background. It's really nice if you have these sounds that are pushed to the back to still have them modulate, because I think, and it's just, my philosophy is that your mind notices these background elements when they're getting repetitive, even when you don't necessarily notice it. It's kind of like when that song on the radio is really quiet in the background, but it still annoys you. I don't know. So I recommend doing things to just modulate it a little bit. And it's a really good practice to sometimes solo stuff and see if it modulates enough to where you don't want it to modulate so much that it changes the character of it, but you want it to modulate enough to where it's not driving you absolutely crazy when you listen to it on your own. So I just pan over here. So you see what's going on there. Another thing that I've got going on is I've got a filter engaged here. So this is actually just triggering the audio 8 here. And yeah, it's just turning the device on. So if I turn that off, then it kicks the bass back in. And I'm doing a slight filter sweep there, as you can see right here. And there's one other element that I wanted to show you. And it's this one right here. And for this sound, people have been asking me, make things that don't annoy you. Yeah, that is a good producer mantra. For this, I had this idea that for panning, I said that panning can be used for creative purposes and it can be used for mixing purposes. And in this case, I am using panning on this element largely as a creative purpose, where I've pictured kind of being in a crowded party environment, and I wanted to have the sound of this sound kind of pan around the room while so I'm modulating the volume and I'm also modulating the panning. So yeah, nope, there we go. So here's the volume that's coming up, but also whenever you can kind of subtly hear that the track is shifting from your left to your right ear. Mattia, that's a really nice thing to hear. Thank you. Yeah, Marcus, I think we're all hanging in there. I'm glad you're doing all right. I know that New York's really crazy right now, so we're all thinking of you and cheering all of you on. And I hope it gets better soon. Kyle, this is from Jason Neumeier. Kyle, is there a formula when you stick to when sequencing a track? I've noticed a lot of artists stick with a particular template or structure for their work. Jason, to answer your question, I think every artist wants to say they don't stick with the formula, but I'm going to be really honest here. Once the delay calms down. Techno is very formulaic. And even the stuff that I find really creative, it's still formulaic. So it's DJ music, it's club music, it's all using a 4/4 time signature. There's not like tempo changes, and there's often not a bridge and a chorus or whatever. I mean, every musical genre has kind of a format. So I don't necessarily have a set process for how I sequence a track. Sometimes I'll be making loops and it'll just say, something just clicks and it's like, okay, let's start writing this out before I just get stuck in this little loop, you know? And, you know, like it's like the little kids in those revolving doors. At some point, they like don't know when the right time is to leave the revolving door because they're scared of getting like trapped. But at some point, you just have to like make a go for it and start sequencing it out. And I'm gonna show, hopefully we'll have time, I'll show a few tricks that I use. Like just start sequencing it out and create kind of a building block for what you're doing, and then go back and chop things up. And sometimes you can like more drastically chop things up. So I don't quite remember how I wrote this track, but my guess is that if you see kind of where some of the, like I'll look at something like this. This was probably, because there's all these different blocks, I probably chopped up a lot of different places in this track. So this might have been like a 10-minute jam session, and I just started chopping it up as soon as I was ready to make it more into a track. So Jason, I hope that answers the question. Techno's kind of formulaic, but I don't necessarily have a set structure for formatting. Sometimes I'll just like jam with the synthesizer. And in fact, I think I recorded this sound right here, if I can do that. Okay. This is a sound that I recorded out for like a really long time in the studio, and then I kind of retrofitted it into the track. So, yeah. That would be I think that was the first thing that I made in this track. And then build stuff around there. So, okay, now we've got this next sound that's coming in right here. Here at the highlighted bar you can see. Not a bad beer. It's an alcohol-free beer, and I've got to say, it's not bad. Tanzenzäpfle. What's Zäpfle mean? Someone that's a better German speaker than I am. Okay, here is the next sound. I'm going to solo this. Pretty boring sound on its own, if you ask me, but it kind of pushed things along with this. And something I'm doing here, let me just loop this. Command L loops the section that you've got, by the way. So I've got Decapitator on as usual. I love this plugin. Just a little tip, on Black Friday, Sound Toys always has a sale and you can get the whole bundle for like 250 bucks. And if there was one bundle of plugins, I would say that Sound Toys is the one. So I'm gonna turn that off, and I'm also gonna turn this off. This is just a random sample, and I also want to kind of demystify. Sometimes I'm using sounds that everybody has access to, and I really discourage people from getting too hung up on creating your own like sounds. There's value in that. There definitely is. Like I think of someone like a producer like Blawan, and his sound palette is so distinctly his that that you can really tell. You can tell how much effort he's putting into creating his own sound palette. But that's a special skill set, and not everyone has it, and it's okay if you don't have it. That does not mean, if you don't know how to, just because you're not a sound designer by trade, doesn't mean you can't create music. And I think that sometimes a lot of these tech talk interviews and stuff, I really enjoy them. In fact, if you want to see something cool, Ian Pooley just did a really cool, if someone could post the link in the comments, Ian Pooley just did a electronic beats thing on his MPC 3000, I think, and it's amazingly done, and he kind of walks you through, and that was the first time I've ever heard somebody explain an MPC in a way that doesn't intimidate me. But do not get so focused on, don't feel like you can't use sample packs or like Native Instruments. Like I said, they have a phenomenal sound library that comes with Machina. And even if you could go on like eBay and buy a super out of date Machina or something for like 50 bucks, it should come with the software, and that would mean that you would have access to the registration that could get you the sound library, which would be well worth. The sound library on Native Instruments is worth its weight in gold. But there's all kinds of stuff, and so don't let your lack of ability, you can improve sound design as you go, and I think everybody should. Everybody should learn how to create their own sounds, but not everybody's there yet, and sometimes when you're feeling creative, you just need to get stuff on the canvas. And if you spend all this time trying to create, if you have this rule in your head that you need to create everything and it's got to be made from scratch and all this, then sometimes like you're going to miss out on these creative opportunities. So this is a sample. I think it's actually from Native Instruments, and it's pretty basic. But I love this MS-20 emulated filter in Ableton, and I just have this absolutely cranked. You can turn up the drive on this, and that's what I'm doing. So let me get that volume back to normal, and then turn on the Decapitator. And I basically just wanted to mangle it a little bit. I'm listening to this now, and I probably, hindsight's always 20/20, probably would have had this. What did I just do? Let me find out what I did. Let's see what I did. Oh my gosh, that sounds horrible, and I don't know what I... Yeah, I don't know what that sound was. That was not necessary. Sorry about that. Jason, thank you for the, yeah, Zephyr is Westwinds. Tannenzephyr. Tannenzephyr. Paul, it's a Tannenzephyr alcohol-free beer. Same amount of empty calories. Slightly less fun, but it's the healthier choice. Jason, also thank you for posting that Ian Pooley on his MP. I love that video. It makes it super nice. So, okay. I would have had this up a little bit louder originally. So I'm going to unloop it now. That's another part with where I've got this Waldorf sound. I just have this like one little variance here. It's super subtle, but it kind of carries things along at the right spot. So I've got a open hat here. And again, very subtle delays going through here. And once you kind of build these feedback, like I really like to play around with the feedback on stuff. So if you see here, here's the feedback of the Echo Boy, the delay unit that I'm using. And I like to play around with it to where I'm kind of riding the feedback delay a lot of times because you create so much tension where it starts to almost spiral out of control, and then you can bring it back down, okay? One thing I will say, and I've said this in a session before, you have to be really careful when you're doing this, because if you stop the audio on a place where like if I stop right here, the feedback is high, and it could, if you go walk away and get a sandwich or something, it could really build up as you're away, and then your speakers could get a really bad shock wave through them. So just be careful with that stuff. But yeah, and I'm a sucker for open hats. I would have probably, honestly, had that open hat a little bit louder in the mix, maybe. And I've also got this guy here. And I think I'm running it from the impulse, yeah. So you can, like in this impulse drum machine, you can run from the sound from the impulse, you can run it into an audio channel. You can say audio from, I'm gonna go from the impulse on channel 13, and I wanna have open hi-hat, pendulum to impulse, boom. And then I've got the monitor in. And the reason I do that is that I get a lot more flexibility with processing that individual sound. So, yeah. And we're back to it right here. Yeah, I definitely would have had this. I mean, I'm on headphones, so this wasn't how I mixed the track. But I feel like that could have been a little bit louder in the mix, this open hat. And it feels actually a little bit dry for me. So I would I'll use an Ableton instrument. Let's just put a little delay on it. not much, not much. And I always like to offset those, the little percentage a little bit to make the delay a little bit looser. Yeah, just a little bit of texture in the background. Just my personal preference. But again, I did like 8 different mix downs, and then I chose one of those 8, and now I'm listening to it, I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. And someone asked me earlier, like, how do you know when a track is done? And the reality of it is you're gonna listen, you just have to be okay with listening to a track a year later and being like, crap, I should have done this. And that's fine, it's part of the process. So let me check some questions real quick. What's giving that Waldorf sound its stereo width? I think if I remember, Ken, if I remember correctly on this Waldorf sound was, there's a delay here that I'm using. It's a Max for Live type deal. And that's giving it a little bit of stereo width, but I also believe that in the original sound in the synth that maybe there was a reverb or something on within the synth. So I can't answer it better because I don't quite recall. Ableton Saturator plugin, Wave Shaper can get some really nice crunchy effects. I agree, Lisa. Minimal is cool when used correctly. I definitely agree. Also the amp effect with this is from Jason. Also the amp effect with a few other plugs can get a nice static crunch sound for the harder technos. I agree. I mean, you guys are seeing me right now and I'm using a lot of different plugins. But I want you to understand that you can do all of these different sounds more or less with the plugins that are in Ableton. And if you have any questions, if I say I pull up like Decapitator, Lisa was really helpful, and also Jason with giving some insight on factory plugins within Ableton. But the Decapitator is basically a distortion plugin, or like a tube processing plugin. And yeah, there is Saturator. There is actually what's the new one called from Ableton? Overdrive. Overdrive was already there. There's one more that they added on recently. So if somebody wants to fill in for me, I can't recall which one it is. What preset are you using for Echo Boy? I'm almost, and this isn't me flexing or anything, like I've said multiple times I have nothing wrong with presets. Echo Boy for me is pretty easy to use, and I start just kind of playing around with it at first. So usually I'm not using presets in Echo Boy. I'm kind of building my own delay. So yeah. Any questions as we're going along? Thanks, Paul. Drum bus. That's right. Oh, speaking of drum bus, something that I did here. Let me go back to the beginning. Okay. So so I've got the Waldorf sound here. I've got that. Let me pan over. So I've got that sound and this sound, and I added this onto the Alkaloid kick because I wanted it to punch a little bit through whenever it got on the top. So actually, if I can just solo these two right here. So yeah, it just gives it a little bit more oomph than if I just had this one. Can you hear the difference? So that was just something that I wanted, because I started seeing that the kick was getting a little bit lost in the mix once things kind of ramped up and got a little bit busier. So, but I've also got the microwave sound being bussed through the same group. If for those of you who are wondering how to group, you can highlight all these, you can highlight a group of tracks, and you can right click and then hit Command G, or just right click and it'll give you the option to group tracks. So I've got all these tracks here. I'm gonna solo this, and I rolled off the bottom already on this, just to get the unwanted frequencies out of it. I don't always do it, but it's a decent habit to form. And I've got this API plugin, and I'm just using, like, I like to, when I use this plugin, I'm using it on the drums, but I'm watching this red light for the input, and I'm just barely having the compressor engage. And then usually I'm setting the attack at like something, I probably would have had it set at 30 milliseconds actually, and then had the release. Yeah, but I mean, I'm using such little compression on that, but yeah, it's barely hitting it. So even, I mean, that's a huge difference between 3 milliseconds and 30 milliseconds, and there's not a huge audible difference there. But I'm listening on different headphones than when I was mixing, so yeah. Okay. Again, like I said, this track is so simple. Super simple. That sound right there is the exact same sound as this. Pitch down an octave, or yeah, an octave. And that's really it. This is another funny thing about my tracks, is a lot of times I'll make a second version that's a more reduced version, and the more reduced version always seems to be the one that people prefer more. And actually this has become the one that I like the most of the two. Truncate did a really good, or Audio Injection did a really nice remix on this one as well. I'll post this again on, you can listen to the full versions here. So yeah, that's it. I don't really have anything super special on that, and the track is a super functional nightclub techno track that has always been something that worked for me. Austin, the little controller here is, yeah, I always wanted motorized faders. It was always a thing of mine, and just recently have motorized faders gotten to a price range that was financially feasible for me. This is the Behringer X Touch full disclosure, this was, I'm not, I would prefer the owner of this company to be nicer to friends of mine. And he said some pretty ugly things, and I think that probably would have shaped my opinion on buying this one versus some other ones. But I don't have the money to smash gear and make a YouTube spectacle of it, and I just don't want to do that. But this is, to be honest, all business practices aside, this is a great controller for someone that wants motorized faders. I love motorized faders because you're able to just having something right in front of you has changed the way that I create. It's changed the way that I mix. It's really you would not think that having faders in front of you would change that much of an experience, but I'm punching in a lot of automation that the transport knob has been like super functional for me. So I'm like, I can show you what this is, and I can advance forward in the track and just do everything that I need to do. Yeah. So it's been super helpful for me. But it was the transport feature with the stop, start, and advance functions. I didn't think that I would use that much, and I use it quite a bit. So, Milo, are you looking for the correct key on hi-hats rides? Looking for it, not necessarily. Like the higher frequent, like stuff like that, it's not super crucial. And sometimes I just look for how it fits in the mix. Sometimes what I'll do is I will layer. I'll be triggering stuff in the sampler. Let's see if, so here, for example, I am adding some textures here. Let me solo this. What are we doing here? Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit of a top end. So I've got it half a step above the traditional pitch, the C3. I've got it on C sharp, and then I've got also an octave up on the C note, just to give it a little bit of top end for that part, because I started losing that drive in the mix. But as far as, I mean, if it sounds really out of place, then you'll kind of feel it. But overall, I'm not. That's not as important as like the bass and the kick, you know. If you think about, like, if you watch a concert, for example, like when Metallica plays, every song's in a different key, but they're using the same ride cymbal, right? So the importance of that stuff isn't, it diminishes the higher frequencies you get up, if that makes sense. I'm sure that there's much more trained musicians in this thread that could correct me on that, but that's just kind of my feeling with what I'm doing when I'm making techno music. So. Any other questions that anybody has? bass. I see some questions up here. Pan Aversums, I hope I'm saying the name right. Sorry if I'm not. Two questions. One, when you put the compressor before the EQ and then after the EQ, when do you put when do you put the compressor before an EQ and when after the EQ? The answer for that would be to play around with it. Keep in mind if it, like for example with this, right up here, I've got all the frequencies rolled off before the EQ or before the compressor, sorry. And that's gonna change kind of how the compressor interacts with stuff. So like if you listen to some of this old like Chicago tracks that have this really like squashed, distorted sounding kick, that sometimes you want that low end, the full amount of low end going through the compressor, and then you want to EQ it after. But it can change, and I mean, this is the beauty of software. You can swap it out, and you can just kind of see which sounds better. And sometimes you're not going to notice that much of a difference. But in this case, pretty negligible. And get used to differences being negligible and understand that every track is kind of a collection of decisions that you've made. So you have some leeway where it's not like when if you were to put those in a different order, it's not like that would ruin the track. But you can experiment with stuff. And the more calculated your decision making comes with the technical side, the better your mixes are gonna get. The second question from Pan is, when do you put the delay before the reverb and when after the reverb? Again, it's really depending on, do you want the reverb to capture, I can't even explain, but again, try both out. And I've never listened to a song where I'm like, this song would be good, except they put the reverb before the delay. You know, like it just doesn't happen. You don't listen to, we get so technical and nerdy, and it's fun to talk about over our Tanzenseffler beer, my sponsor for tonight. But you can, like, tell me, when have you ever listened to a Depeche Mode song and been like, they used a preset? When have you ever listened to a Nine Inch Nails song and been like, it's a preset? But I've got news for you. Like these bands that we all love, they are flying some synthesizer genius, when they're getting ready to record an album, they'll fly the crews in that know these synthesizers like the back of their hands. They'll lock them in their studio that they're about to record in 3 weeks, and they'll say, hey, create a whole new, delete all these presets on the synth and create 120 new presets for me, so that when I come into the studio to record my new album, I've got this whole new palette of sounds. And these are bands that are viewed as super innovative, super pioneering. And techno, I love techno, but man, sometimes it can get really snobby with this stuff that just kind of misses the point. It's if you want to nerd out on stuff, that's fine, and that's super cool. Like if I enjoy sometimes making presets and doing all that stuff, but sometimes I just want to create, and I don't want to have to think about the sound design when I'm having a creative moment. So yeah, don't don't get too hung up on the technical stuff, and remember that all that stuff's super important. Also, don't ignore it. Don't say, well, I don't care about any of this, because it does matter. But I'm just saying that the technical side of things doesn't have to be your forte for you to create, okay? And techno's also, it's such a DIY, do-it-yourself scene and culture that sometimes you end up getting too caught up on the things that aren't super important. Like, all of your favorite bands and all of your favorite musicians, they have engineers. They have engineers that are setting up the guitar pedals, they're setting up the microphones, they're setting up all this stuff. And then techno, all of a sudden, you know, these are really big touring acts and really influential acts that have had engineers. And then I guess the difference is that in the album credits, they always give the credit to the engineer. And in techno, sometimes it's a little bit of a question of the engineers who really are an important part of the production process are often not mentioned, which is a different discussion. But don't get too caught up in these technical things, in that I experiment with them. Figure out because there's not a set rule on what order things should be in, and just have fun with it. And sometimes I listen to early tracks of mine and I'm like, I definitely made mistakes in this process, but how the hell did I make that sound? And it's almost like I became too schooled in some of these techniques where you lose this like instinct of anything goes, and you start learning kind of how to behave in the studio, and that can be a negative thing, actually. So just do whatever you need to do to have fun with it. Bass needs to be in mono. I would agree, generally. What else? I'm scrolling down, catching up with the questions. Pitching things up, there's from Lisa, pitching things up and down is so simple but useful. I like to double up synth lines by changing pitch and doing different effect stuff on each one. It's a really good tip, Lisa. And Lisa, I'm still waiting on you to, I think you should really do a video for everybody that I'd really like to share with people. I think you've got a lot of good stuff to say. And it was also really cool, Lisa, that your process kind of, it took you years to find Lisa, by the way, is non-compliant. Go check out her music, and she's always been a world-class DJ since I started DJing. She was doing this for years before I even knew what techno was. But it was really interesting to see Lisa she kind of found her stride as a producer much later on. She had done some nice projects, but things like when there was a sound that sounded very unique to Lisa, that was later on. And so also be encouraged that it can take some time to find your process and your way of what works for you. Razvan, am I saying that right? I hope so. Sorry if not. Hi, how do you prefer to sketch the idea of a track? I mean, you get all the elements in session ideas and session view, and then when you move over to arrangement mode, you make fine-tuning stuff. Yeah, I kind of addressed that earlier. So you might be able, when this is over, to look back on that, but I don't have a rule. Sometimes I'm in arrangement from early on. Like maybe sometimes I'll have like a loop that I'll want to stretch out in arrangement view and go from there. Sometimes I do clips over in if I can get my computer to work, switch it over to session view. So I've got just like a couple clips. So this would indicate if I'm doing like an autopsy on this track, it would indicate to me that I'm started out getting ideas in this view, but yeah, sometimes there's a lot more clips in this than there are right now. So, but this is a good, gives you kind of a good idea of how I work. Like once I get just a few elements going, I'm like, okay, let's just get over to arrangement view. Otherwise, this is gonna join the graveyard of 300 loops that I've created and I'm never gonna use. So I tend to be more aggressive in getting started on the arrangement because, I mean, it's kind of like stuff has to be tested, right? So, I mean, look at the situation that's going on right now with the crazy shit with coronavirus. You have like these ideas that doctors are starting to say, hey, this might work or it might not. But then there's like, until you carry that process out, that idea is just an idea. And so like, for me, the loop is the idea. And then the arrangement is stretching it out over time to see if that idea actually holds weight. And that's, so I find, I used to sit and create loops and loops and loops and loops, but sometimes it's nice just to test that idea and just see early on if that idea can last 90 seconds. Because if it can't last 90 seconds, it can't last 5 or 6 minutes, right? So that would be something that I'd really encourage you to start the arrangement a little bit early, or it'll never. So yeah, I hope that answered the question, Razvan. It's a really good question. Thanks for asking that. Let's see. Making sense, pressure is on. Yeah, pressure is on, Lisa. Forrester, nice presentation. Question, do you bust the kick with the bass in the same audio track? A lot of times I do, Forrester. A lot of times I do. I find if I bust the kick and the bass together, and if I can get the kick and the bass working well together, then I can take that kick bass bus, that group, and I can mix the group because I already know how the kick and the bass sit together. And once I get that, then I want to lock that in and then just adjust the level of those two together, if that makes sense. So you're always going to need to adjust the volume, but the kick and the bass for me is such a fragile mix that once you get that, group it together and leave it. And then if you need to kind of squash it a little bit, then compress that. And I feel like you can get a lot more energy out of the master channel if you do some processing, like some compression and maybe a little bit of limiting in the drum and kick bus. Roy, yes, earlier showing signs. Okay, cool. Thanks for answering that, Roy. Hi, Kyle. This is from Glacial Spirits. Any tips on how to avoid getting burned out on a track from working on it for too long, gaining critical distance, focusing on finishing, etc.? I'm going to give you a really that's a good question, but I'm going to give you a kind of frustrating answer, and that it's a really a person-to-person thing. I am like the poster child, as you might have noticed from doing live streams. It's not easy to stay focused on so many different things. And so I am like the spokesperson for ADD. I was ADD back when it was underground. And what that means is if I've got an idea there, like, and it clicks, then I try to get as much of it as I can on paper right away, or in arrangement, not on paper, you know what I mean. Because what I found is that if I create a loop, step away from it, and then come back another day to this loop, it's like you start losing that initial feeling. That's just my personal thing. But there's also been great tracks that I've made that I really ended up enjoying that were kind of like a loop that just sat there for ages, and then I was able to kind of come out with, hash out an idea later on. So what I'll do is, like, you kind of can group your days, and you just kind of have to get in tune with what you're feeling at the moment. If you're not feeling like this creative process to arrange stuff, then maybe it's time to pull up a session. Like, I mean, look, I'll forgive all the track names. Sometimes you probably all see something that's, I hope there's nothing too incriminating, but let's go to Ableton sessions. I mean, if I go down through this list, I'm in like March of 2020. Shit. I moved the folder, and so now it says the date. I used to have date modified being kind of let's do date created. There we go. So if I do date created, once I get from, like, okay, what's today's date? April 6th, 2020. Once I get to like January of 2019, I'm like, what the hell is this? I don't even remember what this is. So then I'll say, okay, let's, like, Thanksgiving project. What's Thanksgiving project? Let's pull that up. And sometimes it just, you remember very quickly why you closed that session. But sometimes something different clicks in your head, and it's just a matter of figuring out when to pull the trigger on something and when to move on. And there's no right answer for that. So, yeah, let's see. I find taking a walk outside, no music is helpful. That's a good tip, Lisa. I also like the beer place right across the street from your apartment. That could be dangerous, though. You might forget that you're working on music after that. Yeah, walks work well, Martin. Well, my challenge is not to overcomplicate my tracks. Yes, that is. And a lot of times, this is another thing about this little controller. Obviously, everything that the controller does, you can use with the mouse and cursor, but just going through and being able to hit solo on stuff and mute stuff, like, you pull down the volume really fast on stuff, it creates like ideas of, I tended just to add and add and add and add and never pay attention to possibly subtracting stuff. So yeah, always never forget that you can subtract as easily as you can add. So let's see, I just put it up early and wake up. If you wake up in the morning and it doesn't suck, keep working on it. Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge list, Marcus, but I mean, let's be honest. Not everything on that list is worth talking about. The brew pub caught on fire? That's horrible. Daniel. The falafel place, yeah. Yeah, we saw each other. Daniel, I always love your story about your lost passports. Those are some for the books. I just remember you telling me these stories and just crying, laughing about this. So, okay, any other questions or anything that I can do before heading out? One thing I want to remind you of, and I'm gonna link the video here. If you could go, 2 favors. Well, I want to give you a few updates. First, I will be doing the first thing I want to tell you is to, if you could, go to my YouTube channel, which I'll type the link in, and just go ahead and subscribe there, because I want to start doing some live streams there, and obviously having an audience that would be interested in that is super helpful. And then streaming is like a video game. You have to like unlock options with it's like a carrot on a stick. But I do think YouTube, I like the format for the YouTube streaming a lot. And yeah, I think some people that have escaped the clutches of Zuckerberg, not that Google is this angel company, but yeah, it would just be nice to give people some different options. And another thing for producers out there, send me, I describe it in this video that I'm posting right now. Send me a track you're working on. I want a SoundCloud link of a track you're working on but kind of struggling with. And I want you to describe the specific issue that you're struggling with. Again, don't just say, what do you think of this track, or is this track good or bad? Because my opinion doesn't really matter in that situation. But if you say, hey, I've got this problem where like the hi-hats aren't really fitting in the mix, or like the bass line kind of sounds a little bit, I'm trying to make it sound a little bit grittier and I can't get that, can you help me do that? And I'm going to listen to these tracks, and they can be works in progress. And if I decide that that your situation, like your problem, is something that could be really useful to talk about, it's not a contest of who's got the best tracks. It's really the problems and issues that I can make the most sense of, that would be the most useful for helping everybody else. So I'm basically going to, instead of kind of reducing what track, the finished track that I've worked on, I'm gonna hopefully get a few sessions from you all that I can pull up and say, okay, this person had this question, and I'm gonna sit and we're gonna work on that together. So yeah, so post the SoundCloud link, description of the problem. If I decide to use that question, I'm gonna write you and ask you for the actual session so I can pull it up on my end, and then we'll do that also in a live stream. And this whole thing is a giant, long-running experiment, and so I'm learning and figuring out what's working, what's not. I love the feedback that you all have for this, and it's really, really fun. I know I say it a lot, it's really fun for me. It's really fun to learn, work, all kind of learning together. And it's been super rewarding for me. So yeah, I really enjoy it. Thanks for all the nice feedback that you all have given. And I'll answer some questions before signing off, but I just wanted to say that. Marcus, how has your life changed since the pandemic? Well, the club business isn't booming right now, we'll say. So yeah, it involves a lot more staying at home, but here's the silver lining that I've had with this whole pandemic situation. I've started realizing, especially through doing these live streams, I've started realizing the things that I really value and the things that I've always loved about this scene and techno was I loved creating. I loved the like camaraderie and interacting with. I loved that there was no like, at least in my eyes, when I first started going to raves. Like Lisa was at some of the first raves, and she scared me a little bit. I'll admit, but like there wasn't this like DJs here, ravers here. There wasn't like this. Maybe I was just naive, but I really loved that you could reach out and touch anybody in the scene, and you could get someone's email and send them an email and write them questions. And I really love that. I've done some teaching in my days in different capacities, and I really love that. I love creating, teaching, and I also love DJing. DJing's clearly not an option right now. And I feel like the career side of my techno life got kind of in the way of that. And now I have no career in techno, and I'm laughing about it in like kind of like I'm so screwed type of way, but there is some kind of liberation that I've found where now the only thing I can do is things that bring me joy, because nothing's going to bring me money. So this is really something that I've found that it's kind of returned me to the roots of like why I got into this in the first place. And yeah, that's a long answer, but you asked. So tell me about how your situation is going. I mean, for those who don't know, Marcus Roten is the principal timpanist at the New York City Philharmonic. He studied, Marcus, did you study in Berlin or did you study in Hanover? You grew up in Hanover. You have American parents, but grew up in Hanover, and then became this badass timpanist. If you look up his name, he actually has his own line of timpani mallets. So he's pretty famous in this world, and yeah. So his gig is playing at the New York City Philharmonic, and yeah, can check out, if you Google his name, you'll find plenty of stuff on him. Jamie Cox. I always wonder what artists like yourself tracks sound like pre-mix down and pre-master, so I can compare my own tracks at those stages. Jamie, this session here is basically I turned up the limiter because I was having trouble hearing on my headphones, but there's nothing on there. I've got a little bit of EQ there. Little bit that I probably wouldn't, now that I'm looking at it, I probably wouldn't have had it on. So there's nothing there on the mastering chain. And then I kind of mix as I go a lot of times. But then at the end, I'll kind of give it once through and go from there. And I will sometimes put a limiter on stuff as I'm mixing, not while I'm mixing, but like if I've got I'll put the limiter on just to kind of see how it fares whenever it starts getting squashed down. So I don't use Ableton's limiter anymore. I use the L3 with Fab Filter. And the great thing about this track in this case was that it doesn't change the sound a whole lot. So yeah, and for this, they gave me, I think if I remember correctly, they gave me a few options for mastering, and I think that some different mastering engineers, they're like producers or artists, they have their own sound. And for this sound, Brian Sinhaji does a really good job with mastering for like I really wanted this kind of sounding a little bit crunchy and aggressive. And Brian Sinhaji does really good for like the really, the stuff that my everyday stuff. I'm using Connor Dalton at Glowcast, and he's great. And he actually did check it out. Got my Glowcast mastering shit underneath here, but it was too cold in this apartment. He gave a tip, and he's gonna share that with you on my YouTube channel about some things that he's learned along the ways. But yeah, so like I use usually Connor Dalton, but for this track I use Brian Sinhaji, and super crunchy, like really kind of a compressed sound. He's really able to do that. You can hear it in his original production. So Eric Joseph, how to avoid a phase problem on the lows when you layer several kicks? Okay, a couple ways, but it ultimately boils down to trusting your ears. But you've got, let's see. So if you notice here on the layer, I don't have this track. I don't have the layered kick hitting right at the beginning. So I'm kind of playing around with where I want the sample to start, and you can move it around until it actually, you'll kind of feel it lock in to the kick that you're, the main source kick that you're trying to layer it on top of. So that's what I do. You can also mess with right here the track delay. You can nudge it a millisecond or two up or down. See what that does. And also it never hurts to throw on this utility plugin. And in the presets of the utility plugin, there is a phase invert. So let's see. We'll go back. And just see what it does whenever you do the phase invert. So you can hear it, like that's clearly phasing. You have a phasing issue there because I flipped the phase. So then now it's pumping again. That's when it's out of phase. That's when it's phasing, or in phase. Out of phase, in phase. You get the idea. Good question though. Very good question. I like it. What's the best way to release tracks now? Some swear by self-releasing. Others say build up, work, and go to a suitable, respected label. I mean, Martin, now's a great time to just take chances. Like, the sky has literally fallen from the techno music industry, whatever that it means. Like, it is ground zero for the industry side of techno. So right now, like, you're effectively releasing tracks on Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music. And if you can get those on those, I mean, we're all like, you have the same access to channels for your music being heard as Kanye West does. That's super, I mean, I have plenty of things to say about Spotify and streaming services, but I'm not gonna yell at the clouds. But on the other side, it is super amazing that your music can get in all the same stores as like Kanye West or Taylor Swift. And I'm using them as a scale for how big of an artist they are. I mean, I had a CDR one time that they sold, a DJ mix that they sold on consignment at Gramophone, and I've got a picture somewhere. Hopefully I can find it, maybe I'll post it. And it's literally me holding a picture of a burnt CD that had my old DJ name, DJ Aslan, on the CD at Gramophone, because I thought I was a rock star for having a burnt CD being sold at Gramophone Records, because one of the shop workers was nice enough to humor me and sell it there. And I was like, oh my gosh, this store in Chicago is selling my CD art. Now you have the ability to sell your finished product of all your music on all the channels that every major artist has. So take a chance. I mean, but one thing I will say about a nice thing about releasing with a more established label is sometimes it can be a quality control thing, you know? I mean, when we're first getting started producing, you really need to open up yourself to other people's opinions and be willing to have input where someone's like, yeah, this track, it's getting there, but it's not quite there. And be okay with not releasing the first track you finish or the first tracks you finish. And sometimes there are advantages to going through traditional avenues, but look, you don't have to. And the most successful track that I ever did in terms of sales, I had shopped it to a few labels I used to get really discouraged when the labels wouldn't pick it up. But with this track, I was like, no, the labels are wrong. They're wrong. This track is good, and I'm going to release it. And that turned out to be probably one of the most successful tracks I ever did. So there's no right or wrong way. So also change the key of the kick so that they either clash or sit in the correct key alignment. Same with bass. Yes, Jason, that is another good talk or tip. Anyway, Frederico, always welcome, always my pleasure. Domingo, thanks for the nice words. Heather, good to see you again. Lisa, thanks for all your help. And again, also Jason, you both were given a lot of good insight on this. So I love when people are participating in that. Let's see if there's any other comments before I sign off. So I'm going to sneak in, Jean-Claude, from user, maybe it's your real, yeah. So Jean-Claude Von Balls has asked a question. I'm going to try to sneak in a last-minute technical question. Ableton 10, when you're in arrangement view, how do you record an audio track from a MIDI track? I have a MIDI track armed and the audio track armed, but if I hit record, I lose MIDI control over the virtual instrument of the MIDI track. So I can't mess around with the cutoff, for example. I'm having to go off session view and record the clip. Mr. Von Balls, I think I can help you there. I had this problem too, actually, and it took me a second to. So this is the thing that and I'm actually going to pull up the help menu. Yeah, we can pull up the info. So look down here. So this is the automation arm, and that is when enabled, manual parameter changes can be recorded to session clips and arrangement. The record session automation preference determines whether the automation will be recorded. And so you either need to, so if you've got this here, let's go here. Okay, so yep, that does it. So you need, so Mr. Von Balls, you need this up here, this little link thing. Do not, if you hit this record button, that is the session record button, and so that's gonna mess with your MIDI clips, and that's the frustration that I think you're having. So yeah, as long as you've got that there, then you're in place, and I'll just undo that, and yeah. But you need to have this little link right next to the plus sign turned on. Make sure that that's engaged, and then you'll be able to do that. So. Mary Kondo, Art of Sorting out my sample library. Okay. Universität der Künste is where you went. Okay. Ignore my question. I think it was because I was using sounds great, but not reliable. Okay. Okay, I think that this is, okay, I'm glad that everybody had problems with the new Ableton automation thing, and there are advantages to the way that works, and it took me a while, after swearing up and down a few times, it took me a while to see the software changes and what their idea was behind them. So yeah, that's it. All right, hey, you all have been great. And you feel free to send more questions. I'm going to sign off here. And again, remember to go and post tracks and problems you're having in the YouTube comments of the video that was promoting this session. And I hope to see you, hear from you, discuss more music stuff with you soon. So have a good night. Thanks for joining.